My ex-wife cheated on me with my golden child brother and gave birth to his baby. Now, my family, which always hated me, begs for money after I get promoted. I, 29M, got divorced from my wife, 27F, 2 months ago. She'd been cheating on me with my estranged brother, 27M, for a while, and 4 months ago, I finally found out when she told me that she was pregnant. Initially, she tried to convince me that the baby was ours, but my brother's frequent visits made me question everything, so I decided to check her phone. I confronted her about whatever texts I found, and she ended up confessing that she'd been cheating on me with my brother since she pretty much had no other option anymore. My family and I hadn't been on talking terms ever since I left home when I turned 18. They'd always treated me like an outsider even in my own family, and my brother was the golden child. I thought that it was a little weird to start the party meant for me without me, but then, I saw the cake and completely lost it. I finally confronted my parents and asked them why they hadn't thrown me a party for an actual, real achievement instead, and they told me that after my acceptance letter, they didn't want my brother to feel left out, so they threw him a party instead. And instead of throwing a tantrum, I should be trying to uplift my brother as well. That just completely broke me, and that very day, I made up my mind to never come back to them ever again. And I stuck to it. I paid my way through college by taking out a loan and working, and then rented a tiny apartment with a friend after I was done with college. I never spoke to my parents after I moved out for college, and neither did they try to get through to me either. Of course, ages have passed since then, and last year, my brother reached out to me online to ask if I wanted to reconnect with him and my parents since they really seemed to miss me. A lot had happened since I'd left home. Like 2 years ago, I'd gotten married to my ex-wife. I was leading a very comfortable life, but I don't think I'd ever moved on from whatever had happened with my parents, so I did end up agreeing to meet them. It was awkward and felt uncomfortable initially, but they were making an effort to fix whatever they'd done to me in the past, so I felt obliged to make an effort for them as well. So I invited them to my home as well, and I guess that was my first mistake, introducing my brother to my ex. They met, they started an affair, and she got pregnant. I was really happy when I found out that she was pregnant, since I'd obviously thought that the baby was mine. But then, like I'd mentioned earlier, my brother started visiting more often after I found out about the pregnancy, and while initially it didn't bother me, it started getting weird when he would touch my wife's pregnant stomach and speak into it. My ex told me that it wasn't that big of a deal, but I just couldn't shake off a sneaking suspicion that my brother had more to do with the baby than he was letting on. 6 months into the pregnancy, I decided to go through her phone while she was asleep, and it confirmed everything that I was terrified of. The texts between my ex and my brother proved that it was actually his baby, and they'd been together for a while now. Not only that, my ex had no intention of ever letting me know that the baby wasn't even mine. She and my brother planned on telling me about the affair after the baby was born, and then, she'd get a divorce from me and finally get with my brother while they'd live off the fortune with the child support that I'll be paying. The next morning, I asked her about the texts, and while she did try to deny it at first, she eventually gave up and confessed. That was the end of my marriage of 2 years, and well, of course, my parents sided with my brother and my ex. All their words about the two of us being equally important to them were just words after all. When my ex and my brother announced our divorce on social media and her decision to marry him, my entire family was fully supportive of their decision. Nobody cared that they'd ruined my mental health and broken my trust. Not just that, my ex had been lying to me for 6 months and telling me that the baby was mine. It felt as though I'd not just lost my wife but also my kid, and it just hurt so much. My parents told me that this was for the best, and once again, refused to even act like my brother had wronged me. They, in fact, told me that I should be happy that my ex and brother had finally found happiness and should join the celebrations. Once again, I cut them out of my life, and that messed up my divorce as well. My ex-wife walked away with a huge settlement sum in my car, all because my family was on my wife's side in the divorce because she was with my brother now. She and her lawyer cooked up some story about how I was toxic and controlling and forced her to quit her job even though it was her own choice, and my family reinforced it by saying that the reason they'd cut me off in the first place was because of my misogynistic attitude and temper tantrums. So the evidence was stacked against me, and I lost a lot of money in the divorce, but thankfully, I got to keep the house. When the divorce was finalized, I was just glad that I was done with this crap now and wouldn't have to see any of these god-awful people ever again. Luckily, there's no waiting period for a divorce where I live, and my ex-wife didn't contest it either, so I was able to wrap it all up as quickly as possible so that I could move on with my life. It was difficult to forget about all of this, but I drowned myself in work and pushed myself to be better so that I could move on from this nasty episode as fast as I could. That paid off, since 2 weeks ago, I got a promotion. Better position, better salary, and better company car, the works basically. And I couldn't have been happier about it, so I decided to treat myself to a solo dinner date at one of my favorite restaurants. But I made the mistake of posting about it online, and within a day or two, my mother contacted me and asked me to come visit them. I was baffled as to what they could possibly want from me now, since we hadn't even spoken after the divorce was finalized and they'd supported my ex and her lies. I managed to ignore it for a few days, but then she started calling me relentlessly, and eventually, when nothing else worked, she showed up to my office. She simply refused to leave and got into a fight with the receptionist, which was pretty embarrassing, so I promised that I'd visit in a few days, which was how I was finally able to convince her to leave. A couple of days after that, I finally visited my family. They'd used the settlement amount to move into a bigger house so they could accommodate the baby as well, who'd been born just a little over 3 weeks ago. I guess that the alimony was also being used to pay the bills, but truth be told, it didn't really affect me that much since the alimony was a really small part of my salary at this point and I could afford it. My brother wasn't home and my ex was asleep, so it was just my parents who spoke to me. I didn't try to make any small talk and simply waited for them to get to the point, so after around 5 minutes of silence, my father blurted out that my brother had been fired from his job and the alimony and settlement just weren't cutting it anymore. They said that they'd seen the post about my promotion and were hoping that I could help them out since they were running low on money now. My parents retired a long time ago, my brother was out of a job and my ex obviously wasn't going back to work anytime soon. The alimony wasn't enough to pay the bills for a family of 5, especially with a newborn in the house, and I knew that, too. However, I was shocked that they'd even had the audacity to approach me for it after everything that had happened. I was so shocked that I didn't even have anything to say for a good few minutes. But finally, I came to my senses and decided that I didn't need to entertain any of this. I simply got up and left without a word. When I reached the door and opened it, I found my brother standing outside. My parents were telling me to stay back and hear them out, and my brother looked a little alarmed to see me there. I still didn't say anything and proceeded to leave. It was raining pretty heavily and it was a short walk to where I'd parked my car outside their lawn, so I got completely drenched and I was already in a horrible mood. Now this is where I might have been the because my parents and brother came after me, and while I was looking for my keys in my pocket, they decided to ask me for help one last time. And this time, it was my brother who was making the plea. He's always been smug and arrogant, a direct result of the way our parents treated us, so it was weird to see him asking me for help, and it must have taken a lot of trouble to convince him, so they were definitely being honest about the bad phase. Anyway, I sort of lost my cool and ended up telling them to leave me alone and that they could beg on the streets if they were really that hard-pressed for cash, since a stranger who knew nothing about them was probably more likely to take pity on their condition than I was. Having said that, I got in my car and drove away, leaving them in the rain. I'm not going to lie, it was pretty satisfying to do that to my family since they'd done nothing but mistreat me my whole life. It's been 2 days since that happened and, well, I'm not sure if I'm right anymore. My mother has been texting me non-stop and I feel so guilty for not helping them out. I know I have a lot and sending them a little money won't actually hurt me, but after everything that's happened, it just feels like I'm being used, quite frankly. So Ida for not helping my family out with money after they took my ex's side in the divorce? Update 1. So, I decided not to help them out. It was a pretty big deal for me since I felt awfully guilty about how I was just going to abandon them, but then I realized that, well, they'd been doing that to me my entire life. And even in the divorce, they'd been the ones who had thrown me under the bus, so why should I think twice before doing the same to them? I told my mother to stop pestering me or else I'd be forced to get my lawyers involved, and that wouldn't end well for them. Now that naturally irked them, and so, my brother showed up to my house a few days ago to talk to me. He told me that while he felt sorry for how I'd been treated my entire childhood, he couldn't help the fact that he just was inherently better than me, which is why he was also treated like that. And he also told me that I should stop being so weird with our parents for doing what any other normal parent would have done in their place and just help them out since they're in a tough spot instead of holding grudges like a child. I laughed in his face because of how absolutely demented he sounded, talking crap like that. I told him that instead of trying to put me down and manipulate me into helping them out, he should probably be out looking for a job and not wasting his time like this. That touched a nerve, I think, and he started yelling at me about how I was just jealous of the fact that not just our parents but even my ex-wife preferred him over me, and I was taking revenge by refusing to give my family money. I didn't even bother to fight back and just agreed with him, saying that all that I was doing was just to get revenge on him and there wasn't much that he could do about it. So he got super pissed off and told me that he was going to come after me and force me to cough up the money one way or another, and I'd regret ever speaking to him that way. Honestly, I'm not taking any of that seriously in the least. He can try to scare me all he wants, but it's just not going to work because I know he's not capable of doing anything at all to me. I'm unbothered. Update 2. Well, 3 days ago, my brother visited me and tried to convince me to help them, but he was unsuccessful. My parents have already tried in the past and it didn't work out for them, either. So this time, my ex decided to call me up and speak to me. I was skeptical about answering, but then I decided to answer anyway because if I didn't then they'd probably visit again and waste some more of my time. So I spoke to her and it was insane how entitled and cruel these people can be. She started very politely and told me that, like I already knew, she and her family were struggling with money, and while she realized that I had absolutely no need to help them after whatever they'd put me through, she still wanted me to think about it and be the bigger person here. She tried to make me sympathetic by reminding me that my parents had paid for everything growing up and even she had done her best to be a good wife. Like, yeah, sure, except for the part where my parents didn't give a damn about me and always preferred my brother, and she actually ended up cheating on me with the same brother I used to complain about. So yeah, that didn't work at all, and I told her that while I felt awful about what was happening to them, I was already spending a lot of unnecessary money by paying her alimony, which she technically didn't even deserve since she'd cheated on me but managed to get it out of me since my family had no qualms about lying and making me the bad guy for their gain. She started sobbing on call and told me that I was being selfish and heartless, which was just ironic. When I still refused to help, she told me that my brother was right and that I'd left her with no choice but to get the law involved, and said that she was going to demand a higher alimony now and drag me to court to humiliate me once again. Honestly, I'd like to see them try. The first time around, I was so emotionally drained and depressed that I didn't even bother fighting back or trying to prove them wrong. I just gave in and agreed to pay the alimony without even attempting to prove their claims as false. I never was toxic or controlling or any of those things that they claimed, so she had no reason to cheat on me and so didn't deserve a single dollar out of the divorce. But whatever, I didn't care then and just wanted to get the divorce over with, no matter the financial impact of it. This time, though, I'm ready to fight and make sure that I teach my family the lesson of a lifetime. Update 3. In a shocking turn of events, my wife was true to her words for the first time and actually filed for a higher amount as alimony given that I'd been promoted. But this time, I wasn't going to let things slide so easily. I got all our common friends involved and told them whatever was happening and even filled them in on past events, since most of them only knew that we'd separated and didn't even know about the real reason. They were all obviously very shocked, and I told them that I needed them to testify against my wife if it came down to it, and they agreed readily. I also told my lawyer that I wanted to discontinue the whole alimony arrangement altogether since she didn't deserve it in the least. I spent the past few days gathering all the evidence I could find of my parents and brother being horrible people who never bothered to treat me like an equal and are now hounding me for money just because they know about my promotion. I'd had enough and I needed to get rid of these disgusting parasites once and for all, so I wasn't going to stop and think about their feelings at all. I managed to convince some of my cousins who'd watched me get treated like an outsider in my own home while growing up to speak on my behalf, and they were kind enough to do so as well, even though we were never particularly close or anything. My lawyer was pretty pleased with whatever we'd managed to gather and told me that this would be airtight and we might actually be able to stop paying alimony. It was already known that she'd cheated on me, but the reasons given by my ex, painting me as the villain and my brother as the hero who rescued her, were all lies, and even though I hadn't tried to fight back the last time, I was certainly going to set the record straight this time. And I did so, too. My family had literally nothing to say for themselves when I brought up several video testimonials that my friends and a couple of relatives had recorded in my favor to prove that everything that my family had said was a lie and that I wasn't the kind of person that they'd made me out to be. I guess that they'd figured they'd be let off the hook this time just as easily as the last time, but I wasn't that emotionally fragile anymore, and honestly, whatever they'd put me through had made me a lot stronger. So yesterday, it was finalized that I won't have to pay my ex any alimony anymore in light of whatever new information had surfaced, and I was probably the happiest man on earth when I realized that it was over. It was just so satisfying to see the smug look completely wiped off of my family's face. And my ex looked like she was going to start crying any second now. But yeah, I couldn't care less about her crying anymore and was just simply done with this whole thing. I'd thought that I'd go home and treat myself to some great takeout and a movie, but my family, obviously, absolutely had to do any and everything in their power to stop me from experiencing happiness. I was only a few yards away from my house when I noticed my brother's car parked right outside my home, and I was really confused as to why he'd be there. I still went in and there was my family, standing outside my door and blocking my way in. I was very taken aback and didn't even know what to say, but I decided to act like this didn't bother me and told them to get off my property if they didn't want me to call the police. That's when my dad spoke up and told me that I should be ashamed of myself for what I'd done today. He went on to lecture me about how I had no sense of responsibility towards my family and had betrayed them all by refusing to help them out when they needed it the most. After he was done, I simply refused to answer or engage in any sort of conversation with him and stood there silently. I just didn't want to give them the satisfaction of getting a rise out of me, because I'm guessing that's what the goal was, to get me so emotional that eventually I'd give up and do something rash and stupid. But I'm not an idiot, and their desperate measures weren't going to help their case at all, which they should have realized by then. My silence probably pissed them off even more, and even though my mother demanded that I treat my dad with respect and talk to him, I still refused to speak. I could see them getting agitated because they'd clearly hoped for a huge fight, but nothing of the sort was happening. After some more yelling, my brother finally snapped and grabbed me by the collar. He then proceeded to try and hit me, but my dad managed to pull him back just in time while he yelled about how I was nothing but just a jealous loser who would never amount to anything. I mean, it was really funny, coming from an unemployed guy still living with his parents and begging his brother for money to live on, but okay. I told them that they needed to leave or else I'd actually call the cops, and seeing how they're broke, they should probably make a run for it within the next 5 minutes. Begrudgingly, they went away, but not before one last-ditch attempt by my mother to shame me into coughing up some money. It still didn't work, and eventually, they left. It's been almost a day since that, and they haven't tried to contact me since, and I'm truly hoping that it stays this way now.